an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Elder Empire, see Book 1 of Shadow and Sea, chapters 20, 21, and 22. In these chapters, Calder gets reunited with his wife, and the conversation doesn't go at all the way I thought it was going to go, and I'm really interested. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to George for commissioning this episode. It has been a while since the last one, and I went and re-listened to the episode previous, chapter 19, just to make sure that I was on, the right page and that I left off someplace that I could recover from. Let's see. Last episode was Friday, September 10th. So it's been about a month and a half. It's actually been less time than I thought. I want to make a disclaimer here that because it has been a minute, I am going to be rusty on names. So please don't be mad at me and be like, but you read this whole thing, you've been covering this for ages. Yeah, I have, but I'm covering a lot of things, guys. I do 12 recordings a week on average, so just please be easy on me. George is here in the chat. Hi, George. So, chapter 20, we have Calder pulling up to the Gray Island, and Carrion is there to meet him. And I really, really enjoy his feeling really intimidated by Carrion. Look, I'm here always, anytime, for a man feeling intimidated by a woman. But this in particular, because we know Carrion so well and know that there are times where you'll see somebody being intimidated by a character, and when you know that character really well, you can feel like, well, it's either just an act, or their bark is worse than their bite, or maybe they're just full of it. They might be a con artist and there's no reason to feel intimidated. But here with Carrion, it feels like it is genuinely deserved, not only because we know what a great fighter she is, but because as a character, honestly, as readers, we don't know her that well, even though we've been in her head a couple times. So I still don't feel like I have a great handle on what she's capable of. And therefore, I feel a little intimidated by her still, because I don't know her motivations. And their conversation that they have later, where she's basically like, yeah, a lot of us don't want another emperor and didn't like the old emperor. I was like, word? Because I knew that she didn't agree with her boss about using the heart, but it felt more like that's just a fool's errand trying to control this thing that we know from experience cannot be controlled, and can we just stop trying? That's one thing. But to just be like, the old emperor sucked and I don't want to do that again, when that's allegedly the whole point behind what y'all have been working on, that feels different to me. So I'm extremely interested in how that shakes out. So let's see. He asks, I was told you have a guest on board as well. She says, quite a guest. Would you mind if he joined us for our meeting? Nibirius? For a moment, Calder's mind raced. What if he'd been lied to? What if the consultants warned Nibirius to be the next, wanted Nibirius to be the next emperor as well? They could kill the whole crew as soon as they had Nibirius on shore. Carrion whispered something to the black-clad man on her left, then turned back to Calder. I assure you he will be far more secure on the island than on your ship. We will not let him escape, if that's your concern. And he says, help yourself, but mostly because he just doesn't feel like he has any other choice. And this is when he is still watching her, trying to get a sense of what she's thinking and what she wants just by looking at her. A little bit later, he touches her in order to get a sense of her intentions. And it is genuinely alarming to him how focused her intent is, to the point where he wonders if she's even human. And that makes me wonder also. I think she is, but I think that she's just an unusual person. Evil says Will White is live streaming on his Twitch right now. Awkward. I mean, I don't blame anybody if they want to go to that. You can watch my recording. So Carrion asks him about his champion, and Calder says he decided to stay on another island about a day back. He wanted to meditate in order to hone his skills, and our alchemist doesn't leave the ship if she can help it. She, again, gives no indication of whether she actually buys this bullshit story or not. I think the alchemist is still on board. I can't remember where she is, but we know Zaya is, definitely planning to arrive, and he's going to get the fight that he feels he is entitled to. And let's see, here it is. He stepped forward, brushing against her elbow as if by accident. He caught no vision. There wasn't enough intent in her dress for that, but he received a sense of her current mental state. Absolute focus. That was the only way he could describe his impression of her intent. Usually, when you got the chance to read a person's active intent, you picked up a whiff of their background and emotions. Not so with Carrion. She had a purpose, she knew what it was, and she was absolutely focused on that single point. There was nothing else for Calder to see. He took an involuntary step away, though he managed to keep a relaxed face. Was she human? How did anyone end up with such needle-sharp intent? And I am into it. I think she is human. I really don't know what to make of this. Is it possible she's being controlled somehow? Maybe, but I don't get that impression. I don't know. She's just an unusual person. So he's looking around at the island, and we get a real impression from him that he didn't expect the island to look the way it does. He thought that it was going to be more like the capital, that it would be built up. There would be lots of buildings. And as we know, there's a ton of passages and tunnels and stuff. So much of what is important on the island is not above ground. It makes a lot of sense, but he's not thinking that way. I'm sure if he found out about this, he would be like, oh, okay, this makes sense. But it's not something that he is considering right now. The Grey Island looked like someone had taken an especially large imperial park and transplanted it directly into the middle of the Aeon. The only thing spoiling the view was the rolling, misty background, making it seem like the sky was perpetually overcast. Only when he looked directly upward did he see a blue circle like the eye of a storm. I don't remember if we got that detail from other perspectives before. I felt like this was pretty new to me, the mental image of there being just a circle of blue sky above your head. But for some reason, that made this whole thing feel like a lot more claustrophobic and threatening somehow. I know it doesn't change anything really about the island, but that impression being so distinct, I think that I expected that once you were on the island, I guess I thought that you'd be able to see out easily enough that once you're through, the gray walls of fog don't really interfere anymore. I didn't really stop to consider this, but it sounds like he's looking up from the bottom of a well a little bit. So they go into the chapter house, and Calder does his usual thing where he sizes up everything he sees and assigns it a price that he thinks that he could sell it for if he were to steal it all. Not a single painting he passed would have fetched less than 400 gold marks at auction. In most parts of the empire, that was enough to buy a house. And he'd thought navigators were well paid for their travels. Maybe he should have joined the consultants. And I'm like, is this a hint of things to come. Is he going to join the consultants? I don't think that's at all what's going to happen. But like, I wouldn't be totally shocked if that was what happened. I'm just saying. So, the woman at the desk had hair almost as pale as Bliss's, and she stared at him with an iron gaze. For some reason, she kept her hands conspicuously tucked beneath the desk. So, Carrion keeps walking without stopping, leading them down a red carpet marked with the moon and sun symbol of the Aurelian Empire. They finally reached a private room standing open, decorated in much the same manner as the reception room. A round conference table in the center, surrounded by padded chairs, took up most of the floor space. There was a hat rack in the corner, but he kept his hat on. Thus do I strike a blow against my enemies. I really enjoyed that. Just a small little thing like, yeah, screw you. I'm keeping my hat on. Such a petty little, but like, I definitely have that kind of thing pass through my mind, even though it's inconsequential and does nothing. So at this point, Carrion offers them some refreshment, drinks, perhaps something to eat. And normally you're used to everybody being like, no, I'm fine. But Foster's like, I could go for coffee. And Calder is kind of like, you know what? I'm really interested to see how far I can take this. And he says, I could use a light lunch. Do you have any preferences? And he just says, surprise me. And later on, he gets this meal that he is like, God damn, this is really good. He's like a little annoyed by it, I think. And they bring in Nibirius and they leave him tied and gagged standing against the back of the wall. And Calder is just kind of delighted by this whole thing because he's had it with that dude. I don't blame him. So, Carrion says, so, you're looking for the heart of Nicothi, and you're looking for your wife, Jyrine. And Calder's like, all right, I guess we're just going to do this. I'd also like a way to keep Gerald's Teach from killing me and my crew, Calder put in. That's a fairly important point. Carrion made a note. I love that. She's like, add not dying to list. And you two gentlemen, anything you would like to discuss? We're with him, Andal said. And you, Dalton? I'm given to understand there's something we could do for you. And I am absolutely dying to know what that is. I am given to understand there's something we could do for you. What is that then? What does that mean? What? I don't know. It's one of those moments where this happens sometimes in books. A little tiny side comment will distract you completely from the main plot. And you're just like, yeah, no, I definitely like still care about the main plot. But what is that though? It's like a side quest in a video game and you get completely distracted and sidetracked by it. And Foster, it's obvious that he's a little irritated because they seem to know a lot about him. There's a file on the table that seems to be very thick with information, and he does not like that. But he doesn't act angry or irritated directly. He just says maybe later. I'm on my own. For now, we've got more important things to do. And Carrion's just like, okay, no problem. So I'll take the initiative and preemptively answer your questions while you enjoy your refreshments. Was she going to wait until the food arrived? Calder glanced over at the doorway and then back to the table. A pile of chicken, rice, and steamed vegetables sat in a shallow bowl just in front of him, framed by silverware, a napkin, and a glass of orange wine. How did you do that? Calder asked, impressed. You know, that's the most common question I get. Would you believe I never answer it? How could you? Andal responded. If you explained, the magic of the consultants would be gone. She nodded to him, conceding the point. Guys, do we know how they do this? This isn't information we have, is it? It's still, like, mysterious and magical to us. My assumption is just that, you know, there was a consultant who, like, slipped in and they just didn't see them. But that feels so easy. Like, how would you not? There's one doorway in, it sounds like. I feel like you would notice. I'm very curious. So, at this point, she says, so, your ship was attacked by an unknown assailant, and Calder stops her right there, and is like, no, we know who it was. It was Shara. And Carrion's like, and how do you know that? Nibirius recognized her from the Imperial Palace. And I was wondering if Carrion planned to play the, like, how do you know it was Shara card for a while, and that recognition just kind of punctured her plan. Because I'm certain she wasn't anticipating that, but they do have so much information as consultants that maybe she was. The second most common question I receive is regarding assassins, and she does the whole like, oh, we don't do that. And Calder's like, okay, look, let's not play this game. We were attacked by people all in black. And she's like, look, I'm not saying that you weren't attacked by a consultant, but did they actually kill anyone? And he doesn't answer. He just says, I believe she took my wife. And she's like, well, she did. And I'm like, well, what are you doing, Carrion? Like, she just wants to distract him, it feels like. But then when the actual question comes up, she directly answers it without a problem. So I guess it's just trying to preserve the illusion that there's no assassins. And that's like her priority number one, is to just be like, first, I have to claim either, well, basically plausible deniability on the assassin thing. But kidnapping his wife, fine, we'll agree that that happened. So he asks, where's Jerry? Carrion flipped through the file. That which sleeps will soon wake. Does that mean anything to you? I've heard it before, he allowed. I thought you had. It's the credo of a group that call themselves the Sleepless. While the great elders sleep, these men and women stay awake and serve their interests. It's little more than a modern-day cult, and I'm led to believe you've had some run-ins with them in the past. And are you aware your wife is a member of that group? And I really am dying over the fact that they know this information and he only just found it out. Obviously they know because, like, it's clear she is in a prison cell next to somebody who can overhear all of her meetings with the Sleepless and, like, is taking notes on everything and knows what's going on. So, of course, they know. But they didn't have any of this information before, right? I think that I remember Shara getting the file, and there wasn't even information in there about Jerry being soulbound. So I don't think her being a member of the Sleepless was known until she was captured. But Calder may not know that, and so I could see feeling really betrayed that, like, this random assortment of Empire, you know, like, guild members knows more about my wife, who I've known since I was a child, than I do. And I would be so fucked up over that. I would be really pissed. And, like, we see later, Calder is not as willing to forgive her as I sort of wondered if he might be. But we will get to that. So Calder just says, yeah, that's something I'm interested in talking to her about when I see her. Carrion changes the subject again, the heart of Nicothi, and brings that up. Calder says, so people think that you want to destroy it. And she's like, well, that's true, but they are mistaken about our methods. We have a method to destroy the heart, but doing so without taking the proper precautions in the wrong way could be worse than letting it go free. And then she asks, what do you think of the Emperor? I am a loyal citizen of the Aurelian Empire. Off the record. He was a suicidal captain who almost steered us into a cliff. He was so much older and more powerful than anyone else that he thought he was beyond human. He wrote laws and traded lives like a great elder rather than a man just like anyone else. And when I learned he was dead, I laughed until my sides hurt. Carrion nodded as though he had said exactly what she expected. This may surprise you, but many on our Council of Architects feel exactly that way. And he's like, look, that does surprise me. And she's like, we feel that the Emperor saw himself as better than other human beings. And he basically sort of like stunted us. And the guild wants to just like return to that and get another emperor to take his place. It didn't work real well the last time. Why are we going to try and go back to that again? Calder is like, you're acting as if there's two options. Another emperor or just leaving the world as it is. And there was Bliss's warning to consider, too. She seemed to think that a world without an emperor would be in grave danger. He knew her well enough to suspect that she wouldn't care who ruled the world, so long as it wasn't the great elders. That seemed like a wise enough viewpoint to him. And Andal says, how do you expect the elders to respond to an empty throne? The Regents and Blackwatch have handled the elders for the past 5 years. There's no reason to suspect the guilds can't keep the great elders in hand, along with whatever world leaders rise to the occasion. And I'm kind of like, yeah, for the past 5 years, that's not really a long time, especially considering the lifespan of the great elders and the way they perceive time. I wouldn't be so blasé and confident about that. And I feel like Carrion is smarter than that, and I can't tell if she's just saying this to put them off. Is she, I feel like there's something more to this, but I don't know. Look what the Regents and Blackwatch have accomplished, Calder said. The dead mother's influence grew to the point that the Emperor was killed and his successor is fighting over her heart. You seem well informed, Carrion said. Her voice and expression were entirely neutral, but Calder wondered if he was in danger. The head of the Blackwatch is a personal friend of mine. And basically, this continues on with, your wife is well. She has not been harmed. And he is, blown away because he was really expecting her to have been, harmed, tortured, God knows what, You will be allowed a supervised visit for a strictly limited amount of time, after which you will leave this island with neither Nibirius nor the heart. That's very generous of you, but I'm afraid we will need a little more than that. And he says, well, General Teach is, heading here trying to find us. And Carrion's like, oh, all right, well, we have more negotiations then. We can let you stay on the island until the circumstances of this have all calmed down. And the consultant leaned over, whispering to Carrion behind his black half-mast. Her eyes snapped to him, then over to Calder. A soulbound has breached Bastion's veil. You don't know anyone who might have snuck onto the island, do you? Urziah. They'd found him already. And I was just like, wow, yeah, you really did underestimate them, Calder. He just doesn't really understand who he's dealing with. It's like he's simultaneously afraid of them and understands that they are much more dangerous than he ever thought. And yet he isn't quite willing to think of them at the level that they are. He doesn't want to believe that they are capable of the things that they are, because that would be very inconvenient, And Carrion just rattles off everything that she knows about Urziah to let them know, no, we're well aware what's going on. And liberated before his term was completed by person or persons unknown, the arena was destroyed in the process. Oh, because we still haven't heard this story. I have to assume that this was Calder himself letting him out. But how? And why Urziah? Why did he zero in on him in particular? What's the story there? Later surfaced as the official cook aboard the navigator vessel known as the Testament. And Carrion's like, so you're sitting here trying to act like you're negotiating with us, but you have sent somebody around and lied to us about where he was. This would be seen as many people as an attack. We have business to conclude, but what is it that you want from us? And he says, I want to talk to Jerry. Depending on the conversation, I might take her aboard my ship, or I might leave her here with you. I want something to keep Geraldus Teach from killing us all. And as for the heart, he reached into his jacket, and one of the consultants pulled a knife. Calder raised his hands again, showing they were empty, and slowly slid his hand into the jacket, withdrawing a gold circlet with 2 fingers. I don't want either of you to have the heart. It's not that I specifically care what happens to it, you understand, but it could get in my way. You may not know this, but I have certain ambitions. Casually, he placed the circlet on his head. I have certain ambitions. I don't know that. What are his, there's been a comments, or not even comments, But there's been a mention before when the thought of like the subject of the emperor came up. And Calder, when we were in his mind, was like, how do they know? And I can't imagine that he wants to be emperor. But it feels like that's what's being pointed to here. Carrion, of course, is like quick as wind. And she's on the table with a blade in her hand, like trying to get him. And he just has enough time to say stop. And she freezes completely. And this is one of those moments where he is getting what he wants because everybody does react to the crown. But he can see in Carrion's eyes this absolute fucking rage. And he's like, oh God, I better not run into her when I don't have this shit on because she is going to fuck my entire ass up. And he's right. Everybody kneels when he tells them to. And Foster's like, did you know it was going to work this well? And Calder's like, no, I kind of thought I would die. Huh. The gunner drank some more coffee. When he first found the crown, Calder had run some tests. Like all objects the Emperor had personally used, the crown was far more powerful than a normal invested object. However, it still had its limitations. It added a little more weight to his commands, but just to the degree of suggestions, unless the target considered themselves a loyal subject. The greater their loyalty, the greater the weight of his commands. He had considered awakening the crown, but found it impossible. There was such a weight of intent and history that it could take decades and even then might not work. So he's like, basically what he was trying to do was make it fully control people against their will. And I'm kind of like, Calder, look, I understand the appeal of something like that, but that's fucked up, dude. Like anything that makes people do shit against their will is just so incredibly dangerous and off-putting to me. And he's sort of wondering what could be going on here if they were all saying they don't really like buy into the Emperor and his bullshit, but they're still obviously so loyal to the Empire that they can be controlled fully like this in a way that he hasn't ever seen before. So, how did you do this? Carrion asked, her voice tight. Our oath shouldn't... Quiet, Calder said. Her mouth snapped shut. If they all survived this, he was going to have to try very hard not to encounter Carrion in the future. So, please escort me to... I jumped ahead a page. Please escort me and my crew to your prisoners. You are to keep your mouth shut unless you are specifically addressed. If your fellow guild members ask you any questions, say whatever you must to allay their suspicions. Is this understood? Yes, sir. They said at once, even Carrion. Calder tried to stop his smile from spreading, but he didn't quite succeed. Oh, Calder, pride cometh. Be careful. And indeed, pride cometh, because he turns around and fucking Nibirius is gone. And he's like, why did you let him go? And they're like, you told us to kneel. And he's like, fuck. And he keeps it to himself. Like he has to keep up this mask of being in control. And I meant to do that. But in his head, he's like, I fucking didn't even think of that. Jesus Christ. This is so stupid. Oh, all right. Well, we really just need to speed things up now. So then we go back to 11 years ago and we see how this mission to get Calder's father out of prison goes. In summary, it goes like a lot better than I expected. But that said, by the time this chapter ends, we have just gotten him out of the building. They're still in the bay. And that's the part that worries me. We haven't heard anything about his dad in present day. And I don't feel like... I just feel like that has to mean his dad is dead. But maybe it's just whatever he did, he's like put out of his mind or something. I don't know. But anyway, Jerry, we're doing the like Operation Jerry Does Calder's Job. And so she is dressed up in his Black Watch clothes and does the thing where you just act really fucking confident and like you know what's happening, and people just tend to sort of fall into line for you, which does tend to work shockingly well a lot of the time. The problem is if you are somebody who has trouble hiding the fact that you are unsure of yourself. And that is something that I can really run into. I can put on a good face, but I can get rattled if things don't go according to plan. And I feel like I wouldn't be great at improvisation in a scenario like this. I could pull it off as long as everything went the way it was supposed to. And I would feel more and more confident as it went on if things were happening the way I had hoped or predicted. But if things went off plan at all, I think I would pretty quickly start to show my seams. You know what I mean? She marched her way into the Candle Bay Imperial Prison with a forged document in her pocket and wearing a look of determination like a mask. She had spent hours practicing her makeup, trying to make herself look old enough that they wouldn't see a child. So she comes up to the receptionist, and she has had her described by Calder, but even so, like, seeing this woman, she gets a chill and is just like, oh god, this woman is creepy. And the receptionist is just like, administration can't be reached without an appointment. And Jerry does there is an emergency, there's an elder infestation. The receptionist smiled down at the desk as she scanned the paper. Elder infestation does qualify as an emergency situation. Please wait while I call security to escort you deeper into the building. Thank you for your paperwork. I really want to know what's going on in this receptionist's head, because it seems pretty clear to me that it's their physical actions that can be determined, but not necessarily their minds entirely. And I wonder how much the receptionist is able to see past what Jerry's doing, if she can at all. If she can, does she just let Jerry go ahead and do this because fuck him? That would be my one way of being able to get back at the people who did this to me, is to be like, well, I'm going to follow my job to the letter and not do an iota more to help you guys. So if somebody comes in and they apparently have their paperwork in order, and I know this is full of shit, but you can't prove it, I'm going to fucking let them do it. And I like to have that in my mind just because I want this receptionist to have some agency at all. If I find out that isn't the case, I won't be surprised, but it will be a bummer, because that means the receptionist is completely and utterly under control. And I hate that. She's basically going to be a robot at that point. The thrill of infiltrating a prison with nothing but her wits, the tang of danger. She hadn't felt anything like it in years. The Sleepless promised a life full of risk and purpose, but they delivered very little on their promises as far as Jerry could tell. They only pushed for what they wanted, like when they ordered her to steal the testament. And later on, that becomes a thing that Calder asks about, and it's that's one of the first things that gets him really shaken. The Sleepless had sent her to the Greyweather household in the first place, though she'd never learned how they managed it. They commanded her to get a look at Ulsa's secret project, and then to get it out of the Black Watch's hands. And she knows that they're going to be mad that she didn't persuade Calder to steal it. But she's at this point where she's kind of well, fuck them. I'm not even worried about it, because they don't actually know what's going on. And I am getting to learn some information that's actually going to be more helpful to the Sleepless and their cause. They just don't understand it yet because they're so limited, and I'm on the inside here. And I'm very curious. I feel like that has to be Calder himself, but I might be wrong about that. Her coat bulged in the middle, rustling, but she pushed it back down before the receptionist turned around. This was a moment where I was like, wait, what's happening? And it turns out that she smuggled Shuffles into the prison and is using him as the decoy elder that's apparently infesting the place. And what a great move, and how amazing that Calder gets a pet that helps them with this mission right before it happens. I don't is that actually a coincidence, or does his mom know? I don't think she knows. I don't know though. Maybe she does. I don't know, honestly. I have to think that this is what the people that Calder met when they met on the island that is like Nikothi's body where the heart was, and they said, "We agree with your cause." They said something in a phrasing that was like, "You're in trouble for something, and low-key we agree with what you did." And I have to think it was something with this and his father's escape, which means either he succeeds or he fails, but everybody finds out some details that they wouldn't have known otherwise about what's going on in the prison. Because I'm assuming the Black Watch are not fully aware. But that might not be true either. I don't know. So she pretends to sense like the vibrations of the elder spawn. And the guards are extremely jumpy and like very open to suggestion at this point. And she spun and pointed down the hall to her right. "There!" she screamed. They turned around so fast she thought their necks might snap. "No, behind you!" she called, pointing at Shuffles. The monstrosity had buzzed its wings to ease its fall, landing with a soft splat on the floor. It shuffled down the hall, surprisingly quick in its awkward gait. One of the guards screamed, "It's a monster!" I love this so much. Shuffles turns around and, "Monster!" Shuffles never change. You're wonderful. The guards could not wait to scramble away from the elder spawn, pushing each other down and grabbing at the walls in their haste to escape. Shuffles let out a disturbingly deep and masculine laugh, shuffling along the tiles for a few feet before it hopped into the air and fluttered a few yards closer. And Jerry is like, "God damn, I really want one of these little guys. He is just delightful. Look at how cute he is." And I'm like, I'm honestly on your team. Definitely. So she takes out the key and taps the cell's lock. And when she tries the knob, the door just swings open. And there's Roderick Martin. And she tells him, "I'm here to open the window." Roderick's smile shook. "Are you going to let me jump?" Not for the first time, Jerry wondered what they were doing to the prisoners in here, and if the Emperor knew what was happening under his nose. He probably did. The Emperor had done much worse than this in his time. He was no fit keeper of the world. I am also super curious. We've seen the Emperor from Shara's perspective, and she seemed to think that he was like basically a decent guy. And the things that Calder has seen when he reads objects that the Emperor owned don't really point in that direction. And this, what would be the purpose? What exactly is he doing? I don't know. Yeah, I really want more information on this. I'm very curious about it. So Jerry says, "You won't need to jump. He should be right outside. So make sure you don't jump. You might land on him." And Roderick rises up and is like, "Calder, he's here?" And it's really adorable. I wasn't sure how much of understanding there would still be in him beyond the things that he's been told to say and how to act. It's just unclear to me exactly how much of their own minds they get to keep, but he is able to hold on to himself enough that even when the guards tell him to stop, he does turn and act like he's going to go back. But when Calder calls out and says, "Father," it overrides what the guards told him to do, which I was very pleased about. So this is when we get to see her using her vessel, her soul-bound vessel. She drew a finger down the edge of the window frame, her touch trailing green flame. Where the blaze touched, it drilled straight through the wall. If she couldn't open the window, she would cut it free. And this is when the vessel does its thing where it just tells her to burn down the entire building. And I'm kind of look, this place seems like a fucking nightmare house. Maybe you should, but there's no time for that. It's fair. So she pulls the window in, and as they're doing this, the guards are still outside the door pounding on it because she locked it behind her, of course, wondering what the hell is going on. And she says, Calder will have our ride here in just a moment. And then we go to Calder, and it turns out that his raft sank. He'd been sure the raft would hold. He spent all afternoon investing it, meditating over each board with specific intent. It shouldn't have broken apart or dipped beneath the waves for anything short of a falling elephant. He never figured out what he had done wrong, whether his intent had conflicted too much, whether he hadn't focused enough, whether the intent in each invested board had fought the power in all the others. I really want to know about this, and I will be honest with you guys about why. That sentence is highlighted by 83 people. And I feel like that has to be significant. I don't know if it's just because people think it's interesting he never figured it out, or if because we find out why he failed later. And this is like, looking back, you understand. For all I know, there is something with the water itself that interferes with imbuing intention. But that can't be right because they imbue all of the ships and stuff. So, yeah, I don't know. And he is so certain that, like, the bay is full of monsters, and, like, the minute that he's in the water unprotected, that he's going to get gulped by something. And he just keeps imagining that things are circling him. And this is really a true thing that happens when you wind up in water and you can't see the bottom. You can just picture all kinds of shit, and it can get very freaky. Not a fan of water that I can't touch the bottom of, just I'll pass. Thanks. Calder was somewhat puzzled when 5 minutes later he found himself alive and dripping on the rocks beneath Candle Bay Imperial Prison. And then he realizes the wind is like blowing and going to freeze his ass. And he has a moment of feeling very proud of himself. And he sort of has to stop and be like, okay, actually, this is still very dangerous. So a rope drops down made out of sheets. And when the knotted rope was somewhat dry, he swung it like a lasso and slapped it against the wall. Calder had spent most time on this particular item, and it bore months of his intent. As soon as the cloth struck the wall, he focused his intent once more, pouring it into his makeshift cloth, reminding it of its new purpose, to climb. And this works beautifully. It slithers up the side of the wall directly under his father's window. And this is when he sees the thing that Jerry did with her soul-bound vessel, but he doesn't know that's what happened. Had Jyrine gotten her hands on some weapons-grade alchemy without telling him? So I wonder how much of this he's going to retroactively put into place, like put the puzzle pieces in place. Is he going to remember this and be like, oh my God, that was her fucking... That was like, she was soulbound then. Because eventually she does tell him, like, from childhood, she has been soulbound. And Jerry climbs down, his father follows, and they get to the bottom. And she says, there's a little problem I may not have mentioned. And all of the guards begin to, like, lean out the window. They're pulling out pistols. And this is when, they tell Roderick to stop, and he does, and Calder has to, like, get him to continue. So they get to the bottom, and the guard that had pulled a pistol, Calder lifts up his bag over the bay and shook it out. He raised the last device he'd prepared that night that might prove somewhat useful, the bag itself. The pistol rang out. The ball struck the bag and rolled off as ineffective as a thrown rock. Instantly, the bag started to come apart at the seams. All Calder could do with his intent was enhance the properties of the bag. The material itself was inherently weak. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. Like, it's not... He can make it do something, but he can't make the material hold together more than it would otherwise, which I feel like is fair, It's like the kind of thing where you can make me willing to do a bunch of squats, but you can't make my body capable of doing more squats than it is able to do. I can still be willing. The mind is willing, but the flesh is weak, as they say. And at this point, he buys some time. He turns to the guards and is like, we accept your terms. And this guy is like, just tells him to surrender his weapons. They tell him to stay where he is. And he asks Jerry for his coat. He was going to see if he could invest enough intent into the jacket to get it to float, and then send his father out in the bay, using the jacket as a makeshift flotation device. And I'm kind of like, I feel like you couldn't get your raft to float. I don't feel like you've got better luck with this jacket. I don't know. And then when he grabs it, he feels the nails inside clinking against each other. And all of a sudden he's like, oh shit, I know what to do. Using the tip of the nail, he scraped a bloody gouge out of his hand. Jerry gasped and his father moved forward as if to stop him, but it was too late. Calder jumped back into Candle Bay. What the fuck is he doing? Genuinely asking. I really don't know. I feel like I should, but I do not. So then we go back to chapter 22. We get a brief section of this chapter in Nibirius's head. And he's super angry. He hates Calder and his crew, especially because they're the ones that kept him tied up, and he's like planning a really ugly comeuppance for them. He is completely ensnared by the heart of the dead mother and fully intends to do everything that this heart tells him. It leads him all the way to itself, because he can hear it telling him to like come towards the trees and whatnot. And eventually it's the spot where Shara hides it. It sort of reminds me of like the One Ring in Lord of the Rings, where it wants to be found, and it's sort of like against all odds manages to put itself in a position where somebody can find it. So then we go back to Jerry, and it says she had to press herself against the back wall of her cell to escape the heart. Its icy grasp gnawed at her like a dog with a bone, whispering promises to her. Those who listened for too long went mad. Even those who could not read intent could not stand more than the briefest glimpse into the minds of elders. She wasn't interested in learning anything. She simply wanted it gone. This was not the first time the heart had visited these cells. Its power came and went over the past 2 days as someone carried it to Lucan for him to inspect. So, yeah, she can sense that even when she doesn't see it, Shara bringing it down there, she's still very much like, oh, there that fucking thing is. And let's see. This is when, and I was so... I was really excited for this moment, and I was a little bit disappointed at how it goes. But it makes sense, honestly, how it goes. This is the moment where Shara comes to Jerry and asks her why you do what you do. And Jerry can see that Shara is sort of like on the edge. She's exhausted and kind of despondent and discouraged. And she thinks, okay, I'm going to be honest with her about what I believe and give her some hope through that, because she's vulnerable and this may be the perfect time to get her on board. So she does her whole pitch. And then Shara says, "You're idiots. Thanks. That's what I wanted to know." And I really, what I wanted was to hear to hear what Jerry thought of being called an idiot and Shara's reaction. But instead, I forgot that right after she says this, Shara pulls her blade out. So Jerry's like, maybe indignation, whatever it was that she was going to feel in response to that comment, is completely overshadowed by the fact that she thinks that she's about to die. So I totally think that this is the right call in terms of what would be foremost in her mind, but I wanted more of a reaction to that, you know? So then we have Calder arriving. And this is the moment where Shara does not respond to his crown the way everybody else has. And he is just, let's see. he was drawn to his left to the cell in which the Heartlander man sat on a cot. He hadn't noticed before, preoccupied as he was with Shara, but there was something in that cell. It wants Calder dead. It wants to use his body as raw materials to build him up into a monstrous slave. It wants to tear apart and remake him. This is interesting because, like, other people, what it says is like, I can give you power. I can make your dreams come true. It's not saying that to him, though, which I thought was kind of interesting. And I don't know if there's any significance in that or what. And let's see, the heart had only grown stronger since he'd last seen it. Now he was more resolved to keep it away from anyone who wanted to use it. At this rate, no one would be able to resist her will for long. And the man, Lucan, says, "What do you intend to do with this?" And before Calder can even answer, the dude tosses it out between the bars. Shara catches it and fucking vanishes. And Calder is just like, holy shit, that happened so fast. What the fuck? And he sends all of the consultants after her. This leaves him and Foster and Andal. But once they reach Jerry's cell, Andal and Foster pretty much make themselves scarce. They act like they're going to go guard the entrance or something, but he's like, yeah, they're letting me have some time alone with her. And he sees that she's like unharmed and is super delighted by that. And then it's like, I'm delighted by that because I have a lot of fucking questions. And I'm glad that she's in good enough shape to answer them because I need those before I will be willing to take her back onto my ship. And she says, I would very much like to get out of here. I want to take you. I have to know it's safe. How long have you been a soulbound? Virtually my entire life. And, you know, she tells him, you know, how this all happened. It burned him worse than he'd thought to be hearing a news story out of a woman he'd known for more than 10 years. A woman who knew everything about him. And that's a really good point. Not just they hid things from you, but you shared all of yourself with them under the assumption they were doing the same. And to find out that they had a secret, and not just a secret, but like a massive life motivation secret, has to be sickening. You know, I don't know how many of y'all out there have experienced that kind of like deep betrayal, but I haven't, and I hope I never fucking do, because that sounds awful. Like, how do you trust anybody after that, you know? And he says something about the cult, and she's like, it's not a cult. And he says, what did they have you do? Practically nothing. We were barely in contact. And he reaches out to touch her, and she starts to pull away. And he's like, I need to know you're telling the truth. And finally, she puts her hand in his, but it's clear she didn't want to do this. And there is something she is hoping he doesn't notice. And he doesn't actually press too much on that. He's too distracted by everything else. And so it winds up that she's sort of like, at the end of this, even though it doesn't go well, she is still pretty confident that she's going to be able to win him over. But I'll get there in a second. He could read her current intent. She was frightened, focused on escape, tired, and surprisingly, overjoyed to see him again. When he felt that, his heart melted. He almost pulled her out of the cell right then. But there was more. She also felt an old, worn guilt and something else. She was focused on hiding something here, now, something that she desperately hoped he didn't notice. And this is when she says they started sending me places, and she tells him I was sent to your home. He closed his eyes against a returning wave of anger. So everything from the first day had been engineered. Andal warned me, he reminded himself. You don't really know her, he said. Don't marry her. I told him he didn't know what he was talking about. Yet another time, he'd gotten himself into trouble by ignoring Andal's advice. I don't know, maybe he wants Andal to be... I keep thinking Andal's like the Emperor. like the guy that they're planning on. I don't know why. I think it's just because he seems wise, you know? And she does the whole, like, I'm going to try and sell you on the, you know, dogma of the sleepless. And he cuts her off because he can tell, he's still touching her, that she fully believes everything she's saying. And that just really kind of freaks him out. After we met, what was your second assignment? They wanted me to help you break your father out of prison. But it wasn't just them. And the testament, was that their idea? They wanted the ship out of Blackwatch hands. I said we could steal it. They wanted to take it from you, but I wouldn't tell them where we were. And when they found out you'd made a bargain with Kellerek, they worshipped you. Someone with a link to a bellowing horror, a Liathatan, and the Soul Collector himself? What's the Soul Collector? Is that... What... Is that, Kellerek? And I thought that was the bellowing horror is obviously Shuffles, right? The Soul Collector is, I thought that the Liathatan was Kellerek, but maybe I have that wrong. She says they couldn't have begged for anyone more perfect. Some of them wanted to make you emperor. Did they ask you to marry me? He asked finally. She hesitated. I wanted to. Calder, I do love you. Her intent was off. Not entirely straight. She was leaving something out. Did they ask? Yes. They wanted me to, but only so I could teach you, so I could show you the truth. They hated the Emperor too, and they wanted you to get the crown. He had released her already and started walking out. Please don't leave me here. He stopped in his tracks for a second, letting everything he wanted to say run through his head in an incomprehensible jumble. Finally, he just left. So then we go to Jerry's perspective, and she's keeping herself from crying because she knows that Lucan can hear her, and she just has this like pride about him not hearing her break down like this. And this is when, it's the bracelet. I forgot that the bracelet gets given to her in the last section. That was the thing that like somebody dropped into her cell through that weird portal. So that is the thing that she was hoping he wouldn't notice. Jerry gripped the metal. She had to break out of here before the testament left the island. If she forced her way on board, she was sure she could explain herself. She had done everything with pure motives, after all. Calder couldn't deny that. He would be able to sense as much. They could work through this. This part infuriated me, and I really like it because this feels like it's on board with her personality. But this is the thing where people think that their intentions are the only part of their actions that matter. And that isn't it. I didn't intend to do something harmful. I didn't intend to offend you. I didn't intend to hurt you. That doesn't matter. You did. And if you aren't willing to acknowledge the damage you did, then why am I going to believe this isn't going to just happen again? Because you don't think you did anything wrong, really. You know? It's just like effect trumps intent. And she is so confident that she is right, that she will be able to like win him over to her side. And it's so frustrating because that is like something that a lot of people who have deep beliefs in any direction, not just religion, but just fundamental beliefs of any kind, they really do think that too. I will have to get you to understand. It's so logical. You'll have to admit there's no other possible like answer to this question. There's no other possible action to take here. And she just doesn't understand that this is not logical, girl. This is about his wife that he loves. And you're over here trying to act like this is a board game and he's going to respect the strategy. That's not what it's about for him. And she isn't getting the emotional component here. And it's very telling to me that despite the fact that she cares about him, she truly does, and we see it, it's not foremost for her in terms of like her understanding of how he feels. She's still intent on converting him. That really feels like more of a concern. Because if she converts him, then she gets him to, like, take her back. So she's more concerned with whether he admits she's right than the fact that she's been lying to him for decades now about everything. He's the person that she trusted most in the world, I would be willing to bet. And to find out that she was hiding a secret of this magnitude, and not only that she was hiding it, but like his friends kind of sensed something, and he was so blinded by his feelings for her that he wouldn't even hear of it. That's so humiliating. You know, you see this with people who have been cheated on and their friends knew. And it's like all the more humiliating to realize that people around you suspected or knew, and you just had no idea. You know, it makes it so much worse. And it's not like they knew for sure and were keeping it from him, but they had an idea. They tried to help him. So it ends with, no matter how it turned out, she had to break out of here before Calder's ship left the dock. She would count to 500 slowly. It would take Calder at least that long to get back to his ship. If the signal didn't come before she was done counting, she was sending the summons anyway. It was past time that she checked out. And that is the end of chapter 22. So, I'm very excited to be back in this universe. There's 2 more episodes left until I'm finished with this one. And I'm not sure, George, if you were planning on commissioning the rest of the books, but I am booked at this point into March of next year, I think. So it's going to be a long wait. If George does decide that he wants to commission the rest, it's going to be a minute. So just everybody get ready for a bit of a break there. And of course, next month I'm also getting married, so I will be gone for a while there too. But I am really enjoying this again. Dropping back into the universe did not I felt like I didn't miss a beat, really. And Will White is just such a fun writer. He truly is. What a delight. All right, guys, I am going to wrap. Thank you again very, very much for hanging out with me. And thank you, George, for commissioning this. And I'll see you soon with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.